That's Young Goodman Brown. That's not Minister's Black Veil. Minister's Black Veil, on page 389. Okay, we already talked about the little footnote, but notice the subtitle, a parable. What is a parable? Anybody?
Short story with a small meaning.
Okay, a story with a point. All right. Do we hear parables today? Not usually. Where are you familiar with them?
Bible.
Usually from the Bible. Okay. When Christ told his parables, what was he doing with them? Or, let me rephrase that. If you read the New Testament or you read the Gospels, one thing you come to see is that in almost every instance that Christ tells a parable, what do the listeners or hearers say? Or how do they respond? Huh? They don't understand the parables. See, there's this idea that parables are stories that are told to make a point clear. It's just the opposite. Parables are stories where the point isn't clear, which is why Christ repeatedly will say to the disciples, he'll tell a parable to a whole bunch of people, and then he'll later on go off with a group of the disciples, and he'll say, to you it is given to know. He'll begin parables with, let him who has ears, let him hear. What does that mean? It means not all of you are going to get this. Some of you ain't going to get this at all. And some of his parables, the disciples are sitting there going, what in the world is he talking about? Okay? Because even some of what he says, they think he's speaking in parables. And he's not. For example, when he says, the Son of Man must be lifted up. Tear this temple down, in 3 days I will rebuild it again. They think he's speaking in metaphor. Oh, this is poetic language. He doesn't mean it really. Yeah, he does. He means it really. Tear this temple down, St. Paul says. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Tear it down, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. The disciples, they don't have a clue what that talks about. How do we know? They never understood that. What happens after the crucifixion? They scatter.
The curtain of the temple is torn.
Yeah, well, the curtain of the temple's torn in two, the dead rise, all that kind of stuff. What do the disciples do? They hide. Why? Because the person they thought was the Son of God is dead. They saw him put in the grave. Not mostly dead. He didn't need Miracle Max's little pill. He was dead, unliving, dead. So that when the myrrh-bearing women come back to them on Sunday morning and say, Peter, we went to the tomb. One, it's open. And there's nobody there. Well, I'll take that back. There is somebody there, but not who were we looking for. The clothes are there, and there's a guy all dressed in white. And he said, go to Nazareth. Jesus is risen from the dead. And they're like, get out of here. So Peter and John rush to the tomb, and they see the same thing. It's only then that they understand what Christ was saying. So, we're told this is a parable. So what does that mean? How do we understand it? It means that meaning is hidden. Okay? So, we get the first description. The sexton, this is the guy who kind of manages the church property. He makes sure the lawn is mowed, bulletin boards are cleared of crap and all that kind of stuff. He's sitting there in the church, in the porch of the church, pulling on the bell rope. Why? Because the bell rope is telling people, come to church. And the old people of the village come stooping along the street. Children are playing, etc. And the first thing we hear about Parson Hooper is when the sexton sees the parson open his house door and says, "But what has good Parson Hooper got upon his face?" Okay, it's not, "Well, look, here comes Parson Hooper." All within hearing immediately turned about, and they beheld the semblance of Mr. Hooper. The semblance, that is, the visage, how he appears, pacing slowly his meditative way towards the meeting house. Why his meditative way? What does that mean? How do you walk meditatively? Does it mean you're sitting there going, No. Involved. He's preoccupied. His mind it's out there somewhere. And he's not hurrying. He's taking his time. Okay? The bell is saying, "Get to church." He's taking his time. And with one accord, we're told, everyone starts. That is, they kind of jump back, expressing more wonder than if some strange minister were coming to dust the cushions of Mr. Hooper's pulpit. Goodman Gray says, "Are you sure it is our parson?" Notice, what part of him can't he see? Just the face. All the rest of it, looks like the same build. Of a certainty it is good Mr. Hooper. He was to have exchanged pulpits with Parson Shute of Westbury, but Parson Shute sent to excuse himself yesterday, being to preach a funeral sermon. So, the narrator tells us, the cause of so much amazement may appear sufficiently slight. What does that "may appear" mean? For some people it might be slight, but for other people maybe it's more than that. Mr. Hooper, a gentlemanly person of about 30, though still a bachelor, was dressed with due clerical neatness, as if a careful wife had starched his band, that is his collar, and brushed the weekly dust from his Sunday's garb. There was but one thing remarkable about his appearance. Swathed about his forehead, hanging down over his face, so low as to be shaken by his breath, Mr. Hooper had on a black veil. On a nearer view, it seemed to consist of 2 folds of crepe, real thin material, which entirely concealed his features, except the mouth and chin. So it goes down to here. So they can still see his mouth and chin. Okay? But probably did not intercept his sight farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. So notice, it's a black veil, but it gives a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. What does that, a darkened aspect, mean? How does Parson Hooper now see everything?
Like tainted?
Yeah. St. Paul says in Corinthians, "Now we see but through a glass darkly." What does he mean through a glass? He means like this. He means we see stuff tinted. Okay? But what he means by that is we don't see things clearly. Because he goes on and says, but then, he means after people are dead and resurrected, but then we shall see face to face and see as we are seen. Okay? Then, meaning once we're dead, we'll see people like this. And we will see as they see us. His import there is we will see perfectly without any misprecision at all. Okay? So, Parson Hooper sees with a darkened aspect. Everything he sees now, it's like if I were to walk around and put this handkerchief in front of every one of your faces. To do this, I could kind of make you out. I can make out forms and shapes. And if it were black, okay, it would cut out more light. But you can still see a little bit. It's like, you play blind man's buff or bluff. If the blindfold isn't put on well, sometimes you can still see through it. So, with this gloomy shade before him, what does gloomy mean? Dark or darkened. What does shade mean? Darkened. So with this dark before him, good Mr. Hooper walked onward at a slow and quiet pace, stooping as if looking at the ground. As is customary with abstracted men, that is, his mind's usually out here, nodding kindly to those of his parishioners. As he sees them, he nods. The sexton, I can't really feel as if good Mr. Hooper's face was behind that piece of crepe. What, like it suddenly disappeared? Now that's scary when you think about it. If they were to lift the crepe, would Parson Hooper now look like, what is it, Agent Smith from The Matrix, that one part when, his face goes completely blank and there's nothing there? I don't like it, mutters an old woman. He's changed himself into something awful, only hiding by his face. He's changed himself into something awful, only by hiding his face. Hold on. Any of you know what the most prominent form of blessing that was used in the Old Testament? May he make his face to shine upon you. It's when someone would pray, may God face you and make his face shine upon you. What's the opposite of that? A curse. May he turn his face away from you. So that commentators on the New Testament, when Christ dies, when Christ cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? They say that's when God turns his face away from the Son. Because he can't look at sin. Okay? What has she just said? He made himself into something awful only by hiding his face. How many times in the Bible, Old and New Testament, is one told that one can see God face to face?
No.
Never. Never. God himself says to Moses says, let me see you. God says, no man living may see my face and live. Okay? No, it wouldn't that they go blind. They'd be no more. They'd die. Okay? That's when God says, but hide yourself in that rock and I'll walk past you and you can see my backside. Glory kind of a thing. That little point is going to be important for when we get to a good man. It's hard to find, by the way. So, Goodman Gray, he's gone mad. He's wearing a piece of cloth over his face. Notice what's going on here. Who's going crazy? The people are flipping out, man. I mean, they're kind of getting a little batty here. A rumor of some unaccountable phenomenon preceded Mr. Hooper into the meeting house. All the congregation's astir, so he walks in, and people all start to turn around. There's a bustle, rustling in women's gowns, shuffling in men's feet. He acts like he's not aware of any of this. Mr. Hooper does. Okay? He walks in, bends his head to either pews on either side. That is, he's acknowledging people. Hello, Mary. Hello, Martha. Hello. Makes his way up to the pulpit. Stands there like every other Sunday before, with one exception. He now has a piece of black cloth covering most of his face. And we're told that mysterious emblem was never once withdrawn. An emblem. What is an emblem? Trying to see if I have any on me. I don't. It's a symbol. For example, the Nike emblem. It means something. It indicates something. Okay? one, we're told, though, is mysterious. That is, it's an emblem, but they don't know what it means. It shook with his measured breath as he gave out the psalm, that is, as he read the psalm. It threw its obscurity. What does obscure literally mean?
Not clear.
Not clear. Exactly. As he read the scriptures, between him and the holy page, as he read the scriptures, and while he prayed, the veil lay heavily on his uplifted countenance. He doesn't pray with head bowed like this. He prays like this. And the veil drapes across his face. Did he seek to hide it from the dread being whom he was addressing? The narrator asks. Is Parson Hooper trying to hide himself from God? Okay, that's rather an asinine question, right? If God is God, would a little piece of cloth hide you from God? Such was the effect of the simple piece of crepe that more than one woman of delicate nerves was forced to leave the meeting house. And she had to leave. But we're told in the next paragraph, he's a good preacher. Not energetic. He's not a fire and brimstone kind of guy. Okay? He tried to win people to heaven by mild, persuasive influences rather than to drive them thither by the thunders of the word. He's not, if you're familiar with this writer, he's not a Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was a Puritan preacher who wrote what I think is one of the most abominable, despicable things ever written by the hand of man. It's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, where he portrays sinners hanging over the fiery pits of hell by a single thread, and God's the one hanging them, as if to go, you better turn or you're going to burn. I mean, it's really sick. Okay? 30 years ago, I loved it. Not anymore. So, the sermon he now delivers is different. It's not because he stands up on a soapbox and he starts shouting from his lungs. He doesn't deliver it any differently. Notice that we're told. But there was something either in the sentiment of the discourse itself or in the imagination of the auditors which made it greatly the most powerful effort they had ever heard. In other words, whereas maybe before, it's a sermon, we in one ear out the other. Now, they're listening. And they're paying attention. And what are we told? It was tinged rather more darkly than usual. Okay, you want to start getting an idea for how an author communicates some of the meaning? Look at the adjectives. Go through, for an example, and just look at all the words that imply dark or darkness in this short story. Gloom, shade, obscure. Okay? There's a ton of them. Hawthorne's doing that on purpose. So, it was tinged rather more darkly than usual with the gentle gloom of Mr. Hooper's temperament. Tinged. Okay? That's one. Gloom. And darkly. The subject had reference, here's what he's preaching about. Secret sin. And those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest, and would fain conceal from our own consciousness, even forgetting that the omniscient can detect them. In other words, those deep, dark secrets we have that we constantly, continually attempt to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into our consciousness, to bury them, so that not only nobody else will see them, but so that we won't see them. Because if we won't see them and we can forget them, then God will forget them. But notice the narrator says, we might forget them, but God doesn't. A subtle power was breathed into his words. Each member of the congregation, the most innocent girl, and the man of hardened breast, felt as if the preacher had crept upon them behind his awful veil and discovered their hoarded iniquity of deed or thought. It's almost as if he sneaks up behind them with his little veil and goes, boo. Right? Got you. I see what you're trying to hide. Many spread their clasped hands on their bosoms. There was nothing terrible in what Mr. Hooper said, no violence, and yet with every tremor of his voice, the hearers quaked. Close of services, notice, people are barreling out the doors, man. They want to get as far away from crazy old mad Parson Hooper as they can. Some gathered in little circles, and what are they doing? What the hell do you think he was talking about? He wasn't talking about me. He was talking. In other words, they started gossiping. They start talking among themselves. Few shook their sagacious, meaning wise heads, intimating they could penetrate the mystery. One or two affirmed there was no mystery at all. It's just Mr. Hooper's eyes were sore. He was staying up late, working on his sermon. Okay? And then one woman says, how strange that a simple black veil, such as any woman might wear on her bonnet, should become such a terrible thing on Mr. Hooper's face. Okay? Her husband says, well, something's wrong with his mind. But you know, that thing even has an effect on a sober-minded man like me. In other words, I'm not a wishy-washy kind of guy, and this thing, it kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies. The black veil, though it covers only our pastor's face, throws its influence over his whole person, makes him ghost-like, like he's dead. Okay, keep in mind, what were we told at the beginning? He was supposed to switch places with another person, but he couldn't because the other person had to end up preaching at a funeral. And now we're told Parson Hooper is described as ghost-like. Okay? So there's an afternoon service too. What kind of service? A funeral. Okay? And he wears the black veil, and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, this is in keeping."
There's a wedding first.
You sure?
Wasn't it?
No, funeral first, and then the wedding.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about you. This is my wedding day. We're postponing it to the next day. You don't have a wedding at a church the same day as a funeral. It's just, bad karma all the way around. So, Parson Hooper looks, down at the open coffin and everything. He touches the dead girl. The people tremble because some people say, I thought he and the maiden's spirit was walking hand in hand. Somebody else, so did I at the same moment. In other words, it's like they're both dead. Then that night, the handsomest couple in Milford are getting married. And here comes Parson Hooper, wearing the black veil. I mean, you think they're probably going, come on, white veil, please? Because black's symbolic of death again. And we're told the couple stand before him, but the bride's cold fingers quivered in the tremulous hand of the bridegroom, and her death-like paleness caused a whisper that the maiden who had been buried a few hours before would come from her grave to be married. Now, that's just kind of weird. Mr. Hooper raises a glass of wine to his lips. Okay. He sees his reflection in the wine goblet. And what does it do? It makes him run. He flees from the place. The next day, everybody's talking about him. Okay? And he's still wearing it. And we're told, it was remarkable that of all the busybodies and impertinent people in the parish, not one ventured to put the plain question to Mr. Hooper. Notice, we're told the people are what? Busybodies and impertinent. What does that busybodies mean? They're sitting there all talking, gossiping among themselves. And yet not one. What are you doing? Why are you wearing the veil thing? Well, what does it mean? Help us out here. Well, we're cool. Just help us out. Help us understand what you're doing. Nobody does that. Okay? One person, however, was unappalled by it. Elizabeth, his fiancée. And so she comes to him. And she's like, I can accept it, but you got to let me see your face one last time. That is, I'll still marry you. But before I marry you, you got to pull it up. One time. Notice she doesn't say you have to wear it out in public, but you have to be able to let me see you for the rest of our lives in our home together. It's not what she says. She says, let me see you one more time. And he says, no. Page 394, second paragraph. I'm taking it back. About third or fourth paragraph. There is an hour to come when all of us shall cast aside our veils. Whoa! What does he mean? He's not the only one wearing a veil. Literally, he is the only one wearing a veil. But he's speaking now in metaphor. And he's saying all of us do what? We throw up things to hide ourselves from each other. When all of us shall cast aside our veils, take it not amiss, beloved friend, if I wear this piece of crepe till then. She says, I don't understand. Take away the mystery of your words. And he says, I'll tell you what I can. Know then, this veil is a type and a symbol. And I am bound to wear it forever. Okay? It's a type and a symbol. Those are two different things. A type in the Old Testament, okay, was something that foreshadowed something else that would come in the New Testament. For example, Moses was a type of Christ. How so? What did Moses do for the Israelites, the Hebrew people? He was their deliverer. He led them out of bondage. He led them into the promised land. How is that a type of Christ? He is a deliverer. Okay? He leads people out of the bondage into sin. He delivers them into paradise. Okay? Samson was a type of Christ. Noah was a type of Christ. David was a type of Christ. Each of the prophets was a type of Christ. In other words, they're all just saying, what I'm saying is important, but follow what I'm pointing to. Okay? And the last one was John the Baptist. Okay? So, what does he say? This thing is a type. In other words, it points to something else. You guys are all caught up, speaking about the congregation, you're all caught up on this stupid piece of cloth. Don't. It's not the piece of cloth that's important. It's what the cloth points to. So, and it is a symbol. That is, something that stands for something else. And I am bound to wear it ever, both in light and in darkness, in solitude and before the gaze of multitudes, as with strangers, as with my familiar friends. No mortal eye will see it withdrawn. In other words, as long as I'm living, nobody will see the veil off my face. This dismal shade, dismal, it's another word for dark, must separate me from the world. Even you, Elizabeth, can never come behind it. She's like, why? What has happened? If it be a sign of mourning, notice that's a question. He doesn't say it is a sign of mourning. If it be a sign of mourning, I perhaps, like most other mortals, have sorrows dark enough to be typified by a black veil. Maybe it's a sign of mourning, contrition, sorrow. And he says, if it is, I, like everybody else, have secrets dark enough that I ought to be mourning for. She goes, oh, but the world won't believe this is over something innocent. No, they're going to do what? They're going to be like Job's 3 friends in the Old Testament book of Job, who all this crap happens to them, and they all come and say, Job, it's your own fault. It's because you're a sinner. God's doing this to you. It's not because he's a sinner, according to the story. Okay? Notice how Parson Hooper replies. If I hide my face for sorrow, there is cause enough. And if I cover it for secret sin, what mortal may not do the same? In other words, if the narrow-minded little people in this town start thinking, oh, he's got some dark secret sin, finish the idea. What's he saying? What can the veil serve as for them? Mirror. Everybody has secret sin. Okay? If I'm wearing it for mine, hello, maybe you should think of your own. And he finally says, when she gets the heebie-jeebies, you feel it then at last? And what does she do? Boom! She runs. What has happened to dear, sweet Elizabeth? Yeah, I think she sees the mirror. And she's like, okay, I'm going to shut up now. I don't want to reveal any of my secrets. And she's out. Lift the veil but once, she cries out. Never, he says. Then farewell. And she's out of his life. Okay? So, we're going to skip a bunch. Parson Hooper, day in, day out, life goes by. Every Sunday, he preaches his sermons. He marries people, he buries people. And what happens as the years go by? He is such a powerful preacher that people come from far and wide, or far and near, to hear him. And finally, he's on his deathbed, page 397. And the minister of Westbury comes up to him and says, Venerable Father Hooper. What does he mean by venerable? There's one saint that has that name attached to him. His name is Bede, the Venerable Bede. It means one worthy of being venerated. One worthy, it's not worship, but one worthy of being praised, held up as a standard to be followed. He's calling Hooper this. Venerable Father Hooper. The moment of your release is at hand. Are you ready for the lifting of the veil? And then he tells us what kind of veil he's talking about. The veil that does what? Shuts in time from eternity. Okay. Here's one meaning of the word veil in the poem, in the short story. The body. What is it that shuts in time from eternity? This stuff. If you accept that the soul is immortal, first of all, that the soul exists, and the soul is immortal, and yet while you're here now, taking notes, listening, you're not immortal, you're confined to your body, and your body at some point will die, and the soul will go on. When the soul goes on, where does it go on to? Eternity. Okay? So, you ready for the lifting of that veil? The death of your body that shuts in time from eternity? Father Hooper nods his head. Yay! My soul hath a patient weariness until that veil be lifted. Notice, patient weariness. He's tired. But how does he bear his tiredness? Patiently. He endures. Okay? So Reverend Clark again. And is it fitting that a man so given to prayer, such blameless example, blah, 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 that you die with this veil covering your face? Before the veil of eternity be lifted, let me cast aside this black veil from your face. In other words, before you lift the veil, let me lift the veil. And what does Hooper say? Never! Dark old man. What does he mean by dark? Possibly. I think it's more hidden, mysterious. With what horrible crime upon your soul are you now passing to the judgment? Even the other minister is assuming he won't lift the veil because he's hiding some kind of sin. And what does Father Hooper do? With his dying energy, he sits up in the bed and he grips the veil with his hands and says, "Why do you tremble at me alone?" And he turns his face so that he looks at everybody. Notice they just see the black cloth. Tremble also at each other. Have men avoided me and women shown no pity and children screamed and fled only for my black veil? Okay, now what has he just said other people have done to him? They've judged him. They've fled from him. Notice, men have avoided him. Women have not shown pity. Children have screamed and fled. What but the mystery which it, the veil, obscurely typifies, has made this piece of crepe so awful? He's saying, you know why they're really fleeing from me? He's a reminder of something. When the friend shows his inmost heart to his friend, how many of you have done that? What does that mean? Shown his inmost heart. Completely bared his soul. Right? When the lover to his best beloved, husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, etc. When man does not vainly shrink from the eye of his Creator, loathsomely treasuring up the secret of his sin. In other words, saying, okay, God, you can have all this, but this one over here, this one's mine. This sin I get to keep. Then, when these things happen, when the friend to the friend completely bears his soul, when the lover to the beloved completely bears his soul, when the person does not try to hide things from God, then and only then, he says, deem me a monster. Why? For the symbol beneath which I have lived and died. I look around me and lo, on every visage, a black veil. And he dies. Okay? So think about that for a moment. What does he mean when he says he looks around him and on every person he sees a black veil?
It means that everyone has sinned or has a sin that they kept hidden.
Everyone has seen it. Also, literally, what does it mean? Okay, he sees through a black veil. So everyone he looks at, they also have a black veil obscuring them. Okay? So what does the black veil symbolize? Let us count the ways. It's got several different meanings. Okay? Many different meanings. Okay. That's the story. I don't want to tell you what I think it means, or at least not until maybe tomorrow. But let's do the quiz. So we've gone over all the terms, and we've gone over